So I'm actually out of town this week. Sorry if my usual setup just looks a bit different. I'm basically just making do with what I have. So this week we're going to be talking about Candyman. Very great film, definitely one of my favorites, but then again, don't I usually talk about my favorites? So this film was actually based on a short story written by Clive Baker called The Forbidden. He also produced the film. One of the things that really did surprise, if not shock me about the film was noticing that Ted Raimi actually played a small part at the beginning of the film as Billy. So he basically does play somewhat of a bad boy who gets somewhat of a shock. But of course, before he does get the shit scared out of him, he obviously has a wonderful scene with a lovely young lady, and go Joxer. So of course, we do open. We have Virginia Madsen in the part of Helen Lyle. She of course does play the main heroine. We also do have Tony Todd, who is Candyman, one of his better known roles, and both actors do an excellent job. So the basic setup of the film is, of course, Candyman, who originally was the son of a slave. He made his money or wealth through a shoe pattern or a shoe machine type of deal that he did create. This basically did bring wealth to the family. He was able to take part in high society. He grew up, become a painter, and unfortunately fell in love with the daughter of one of his clients. He had been commissioned to paint a young lady's portrait. They fell in love, and when it was discovered that she was pregnant, Candyman was of course pursued, had his right hand cut off, replaced with a hook, had honey smeared all over him, and was stung to death by bees. We have Helen Lyle, who is doing a research report for her thesis, and she's studying urban legends. One of the legends, of course, she has taken interest in is Candyman. Having heard through a janitor about an area very near to where she lives, or the supposed hunting grounds, Sealy Green, she goes off to inspect, actually does find she is very, very much in Candyman country. Very high folklore, people there are still very terrified, but still very much believe him. And part of what does raise the tension in the film is that these parts of the film take place in the projects. It's already a very scary part of town most people wouldn't venture into, so it's very high tension. You're already afraid. You're covered by all these, very, very high horror or modern day thriller elements, which add more to the realism as opposed to the fantasy that later does enter into the film. And it's very beautifully woven, as well as the additional romantic aspect added by music composer Philip Glass. It's one of the most beautiful film scores I've ever heard, and it really does have a lot of depth and very high elements to the film. So the real Candyman, getting wind of course she is looking for him, is very much disbelieving, sets out to make a believer out of Helen Kyle. Basically does seek her out, sets her up for a supposed murder of an infant child in the apartment complex that she is researching. She is taken into custody as, of course, the woman attacked Helen Kyle thinking she's murdered or done something to her child, and family dog has been decapitated. Later that evening, she's set up for the murder of her best friend. Of course, this time her husband does walk in. He sees his wife thrown on the floor with a bloody knife, and the young lady has been drained of all of her blood. She is then institutionalized in an asylum and has very low chance of actually being set free. Of course, then her piece of shit husband Trevor takes this opportunity to move his mistress into the home and get all cozy, so la-di-da for him. Helen does make a surprise visit after getting out of the asylum and finding out all of this information. She takes Candyman up on his deal to take places with the child, so that way the baby can live and she will die in its place. Obviously, having no husband or no home, what else does she have to lose? So what's it really matter, right? So Helen makes her way back out to the ghetto, finds Candyman's hideout, and basically just waits until nightfall. She eventually does hear the baby's cries in the rubble outside in the front of the complex. For some reason, they've been gathering refuse to build a bonfire. So she crawls into there in an attempt to save the baby. Of course, Candyman, going back on his word, decides not only to take Helen Kyle, but keep the baby as well. She manages to get free of him. Of course, by this time, the residents of the complex have set fire to through all of the rubbish in an attempt to murder or be rid of Candyman. Helen does manage to make her way out of that garbage pile. She saves the baby but does die from all of her burns. And everyone from the complex later does visit her funeral. They leave her the remaining hook of Candyman, basically just toss it atop the casket as she is being buried. Later that evening, her husband Trevor is, I guess, remorseful or some type of regret that men like that tend to feel. Who really knows? He tends to say her name repetitively, and in the tradition of Candyman, shows up and basically just eviscerates him. And in my opinion, that piece of shit really did get what he deserves, and very, very justifiable end, especially for everything that she's been through throughout the course of the film. Another thing that I really do like about the film is there is absolutely no CGI. If the film were made in modern day, we would have had computerized bugs flying about, which would have just looked cheap and trashy. They actually did use bees that were less than 24 hours old. This way they were unable to fly. Their sting wasn't as harsh. Tony Todd at one point does take the opportunity to put the fledgling bees into his mouth and allow them to fly out. There is an actual mouth guard or protective piece to protect him, but he really did take a handful of bees and let them fly out of his mouth. And how many actors would actually take the initiative to do that? That's just a very big wow factor for me. Another odd thing or interesting little tidbit of Virginia Madsen, for the scenes in which she does interact with Candyman, basically was hypnotized in order to get those dreamy like stares in her face. So she is actually not acting, she actually is under hypnosis, which does explain a lot. I mean, they're very beautifully directed scenes, but on first glance I always just wondered what was going on. Very, very interesting. I really do love the film. I think it's held up very great over the years. This is the third time I've actually ever seen the movie. I wasn't at all the slightest bit disappointed. Definitely would watch it again. First opportunity I get to review that. So that's pretty much it for today, and I will see you when I see you.